last week's show was about St. Joseph Abbey, and it was filmed at the Abbey at St. Benedict on the Benedictine monks that came to Louisiana in the 1800s. Well, today, we're actually in the area that they called Guesson when they came here from Indiana in 1880s. It's a beautiful place, and we're actually in Tangipahoa Parish now, and the Natalbany River runs fairly close to here, and we're at Rosaryville, and it's very isolated but beautiful. You would never know that this facility exists in this area. It's about 1,700 acres of beautiful rolling land with a lot to see and a lot to do here. The accounts of the area when the monks came here was how open but how barren, and they had to compete with the mosquitoes and the alligators. And although we don't see that now, there's a very definite presence of just how isolated and wooded this area is. So join us on this edition of Roots of Faith. We're here today in the main chapel here at Rosaryville, and I have as my guest today Laverne Parfait, and Laverne is head of the Rosaryville Prayer Ministry, which is really fascinating from what I'm understanding because you're a professional calligraphist.
Calligrapher's good.
So that's just one of many aspects about this fabulous place that we're here. So before we start, though, when we were here preparing for this and doing the research for this, I knew it was a historic place, and there was a lot of history here to try to fit it in one show. But everywhere I turned, they're telling me another story about this place, and that kind of has evolved into a new project that they're doing here at Rosaryville. There'll be an app that you'll be able to download. And so if you visit here, it literally will tell you about every stained glass window in this beautiful chapel and all the other many details and many stories of 130 years in this building on these grounds. So that's what's coming up, but that's their latest thing. But let's, kind of start at the beginning and talk about how it came to be.
How it came to be? Well, I believe you would say originally Carmelites. They were commissioned to have the spiritual formation for all the property from Florida to the east bank of the Mississippi. So that included the Florida parishes. They didn't have a mission here, but when the time arose to where they wanted a mission, it was the Benedictines that came, and from St. Meinrad in Indiana, built a mission here for teaching, a seminary. And this was in, I believe, probably 1882. Don't quote me, but it's somewhere around that time.
Right, in the 1880s.
Somewhere around that time. And it remained Benedictines until they decided, through the strife of farming, we have a legend that they didn't like the mosquitoes in the area, so they moved, and they moved to what's St. Benedict's right now. Their abbey is there. And it was transferred by the Spanish Dominicans, who were seeking a place to train for missionaries. South Louisiana was a great place to train to go into missionary work.
Well, we were a missionary at that point in time, and we say this in our shows all the time, but Louisiana did not have a home base, to give them priests. The priests came from Europe and those regions as missionaries to this new territory, even as late as that. So, and that was Archbishop Jansen's original goal was to establish a seminary here. So from the beginning, this has been a holy place. There were many, many young seminarians probably ordained here in those early years.
The seminarians ordained here, the missionaries that were trained here, it was considered top education here. And some later on were called back into the Spanish Civil War. And we have a memorial out in the priest cemetery for martyrs who were beatified in 2007 that came from Rosaryville.
That's amazing. See, I have learned so much There's not a lot out there.
I'm
I had a
still
difficult
learning.
time preparing for this, just, with the materials there, so I'm so excited to do the show. Now, once the Benedictines left and the Spanish Dominicans came, that was like somewhere around 1911 or 1910. Don't
Correct.
quote me on dates, but the early 1900s.
Right.
But again, so that
When they-
it remained the seminary at that point, right?
Yes.
Until the Dominican
Well, they were
sisters.
recalled, and so they gave the Dominican sisters in New Orleans first option to purchase the land. And they were looking for a place to move from the big city so that the sisters could have a place to retire to.
And I don't mean to interrupt you, but the name Rosaryville, even how that came into play, because it was Gesson under the
They called it
and St.
Gesson.
Joseph, but it was St. Joseph Abbey.
Called it Gesson.
And then when they left and the Dominicans came, he consulted, I think the head Dominican consulted the Dominicans in New Orleans, the sisters, and asked about what name they should give it. And they gave it Rosaryville based on, two things. One was St. Dominic,
Definitely.
because
He's given the reputation of being given the rosary from the Blessed Mother.
And the Dominicans are founded. He's their founder. And then the second was the fact that these seminarians that were coming under the Spanish Dominicans, which I didn't realize, were coming from the Holy Rosary province of Spain. So it's the perfect, the perfect
It
name
was
for this place.
Rosaryville. I believe it was Sister Mary de Ricci that suggested Rosaryville, almost as well, why not? And it has stuck. It has changed in its purpose. It's no longer one of those retirement places for the sisters. They moved back into New Orleans when this became an aspirature. It was a place for young women who were entertaining the thought of becoming religious. So it was a live-in high school.
I was
for
about to
them.
ask, when it like that would be like high school, but geared towards going into the religious.
That's right.
Okay,
That's
perfect.
right.
We were talking about this place under the Dominican sisters, that it was like a high school for them preparing,
Yes.
to go into that. But then now it's been renamed since then, and that's the name that it has
It
now,
became
right?
Rosaryville Spirit Life Center. It is now a retreat center that is open. It's non-denominational. Anyone can come, and we welcome all those. In fact, there are some people that come just to look at Rosaryville, and that alludes to why the need for that self-tour,
Is
so they
self-
can guide it by themselves, just going from place to place on the grounds.
That's it, because these grounds are expansive. Tell us a little bit about what is here. And were a lot of the buildings here when the Dominican sisters acquired it, like in the 1930s? Or has there been a lot of new construction?
It's new construction. The only remaining from the 1930s is what we call the trading center. It's where a laundry is.
Okay.
This building that we're sitting in is in the 50s it was built. They tore down the wooden buildings that were here before. Beautiful wooden buildings. And then another hall was added adjacent. This is Rosary Hall, where adjacent is St. John's Hall. And that's where the bedrooms were added for the retreat center.
And the different types of retreats, I mean, like even, I was searching the website, and we'll put that up for y'all so that you know what's going on here, but they have one, it's a silent retreat with yoga in March, and my birthday falls in March, so I'll be here for that. But
Good.
Tell us a little bit, too, for instance, some other things that are happening here. There is a cemetery here for the religious that lived and worked here, understandably, but y'all have also incorporated a new cemetery for the community?
Correct. We had a cemetery, we called it the Sister Cemetery, and we had a Friar Cemetery. And with Katrina and the influx of population, the local cemeteries filled quite rapidly, and there was a need for a public cemetery. And Rosaryville has always been holy ground. It's
Always.
just coming through those gates, we hear that all the time, that as soon as you enter the gates, you feel this presence And so this public cemetery was created, beautiful cemetery outside.
And you were telling me earlier about in the cemetery some martyrs.
Yes, that's in the Friars Cemetery. Some of the Spanish Dominicans that were martyred were beatified, I believe, in 2007. Again, don't quote me with
These would have
dates.
been persons that had studied here, that
Yes.
became priests here, that were called back into service in the Spanish
Yes,
War,
and were
right?
martyred for their faith.
So, that aspect to me, I learned today. That's amazing. What are some of the other facilities? Or there's a grotto in there?
There is a grotto, and when the buildings were torn down, the last remaining stones of the original building were used to form Our Lady of Lourdes grotto that's outside. Statues and work, of course, done by the community, donated by just faith-filled people. Besides that grotto, there are little niches throughout the property. There's a Sacred Heart, St. Dominic,
Oh, wow.
places, benches are all over the place. The pines themselves, I mentioned one time earlier about feeling the presence. We often tell people when they come through the gates, they leave whatever baggage they're carrying at the gates so that when they enter here, they're free to just hear whatever God wants to tell them. And they don't even have to pick it up when they leave. They can just leave it there. So we find that, especially in this age of everything digital, that your phone doesn't work unless you keep it charged at night. And Rosaryville, to me, personifies the place where we recharge.
It's beautiful.
That people do that with exercise for their physical body. They renew their minds with learning. This renews the spirit. And it's holistic. It goes, all three go together as the one unit. And their motto, forget that, their mission for the Dominican sisters here at Rosaryville is to provide a nurturing environment to deepen the relationship with God, with yourself, with others, and all of creation.
We've been talking about some of the different places, buildings, things that are on the grounds.
Yes.
And we are actually in the main chapel.
Yes, we
And
are.
it's very, very different here, and you'll see pictures, but the pews don't face the front like
they
any other
don't.
chapel I've been in. So I know there's a story there, and I haven't heard it. I'm fixing to. So tell us
Well,
about
as
this
I mentioned
chapel.
before, people would come in and just want to see Rosaryville. And this is the main attraction. Of course, our chapel is magnificent. And coming through that entrance stairway and those double doors, there is almost unanimously an intake of breath when they walk
It's
through
true.
the doors. And yes, it's set up differently. You'll notice that the pews do not face the front, they face each other. If you can remember in the front of cathedrals where the choir sits, they're facing each other.
Right.
It's acoustic-wise, and this is where the sisters said their office.
Okay.
So that one side would say prayer and the other would answer.
Very good. It's so interesting. And this is not the only chapel on the property. There's a very interesting chapel that's not too far from here on the grounds. And this is a big place, folks. I think it's 1,700 acres now. I mean, it's big.
1,700
so
acres.
This is, and you're in the middle of nowhere. This is God's great country, which is what you were saying, gives it such appeal. But tell us about the other chapel, because there's a whole story there.
There is a whole story. It's Chapel of Our Lady of the Rosary, ironically, but it was a chapel that was originally in Manshag. Father Coran was a priest who was stationed in Ponchatoula and was a chaplain in the Army who was involved in World War II. When he was called into World War II as a chaplain, he had he'd been captured, and he was part of that Baton death march. So he made a promise to Our Lady that if he would survive, that he would build a chapel in her honor. And of course he did survive, and when he returned to Ponchatoula, in Manchac, they built this small chapel, lovely, handmade pews, everything, cypress.
Wow.
From the area. And this is on the property simply because of the Pugh family. The Pughs were good friends of Father Coran. It had become into disuse because of the weather, the sinking of the ground in Manchac. So they moved it on to Mr. Pugh's property, and it wasn't being used. And they generously got with Rosaryville, and it has now found a new home here and is used quite frequently.
That's awesome. So about what time frame would that have been?
This
was that
was
fairly recently?
Definitely recently, just within the last 5 years.
Oh, wow, 5 years. Okay. That we didn't talk about that beforehand.
That's it, yeah.
But you were telling me, the events with this family that come back here and others that come here, correct?
Yes.
Like, you can tell us. You were telling me about a baptism yesterday of a family member.
Yes,
Yeah.
the Pugh family. They were married in that chapel, and their grandchildren, one was just baptized this weekend.
Yeah, how special is that?
It is.
Wow.
It is. There's a personal connection. When we had the dedication, we asked people to share their personal stories, and they were so moving, and people are so filled with faith, it's tangible. So you can really feel God's presence there, here.
In talking, though, about this chapel, you and I were talking about many things that Rosaryville does, and I saw you have a poster downstairs, and it talks about weddings and catering and banquets. So besides the retreat aspect, is that a chapel, or is this a chapel where weddings take place? Or
Yes,
do they have
they
an
do.
option of using either or both?
Yes, they do. I believe we just have blinders on when we think of retreat homes. One thing is that we have a definition for retreat, thinking it must be silent and contemplative. We do have them. Mm-hmm. We do have them, and they are necessary and they're beautiful. But then God talks in a whole bunch of different ways. And just being in this space, we've allowed this space to be used for weddings, for baptisms, obviously now for funerals.
That's true.
Yeah, with the new cemetery. And we find that people like the atmosphere, so we do have banquets and office parties and
Pancakes for Santa.
This was
Which
just this past weekend.
This weekend I was looking on the internet, not to interrupt
Pancakes
you,
for
but
Santa.
when I read it, the first thing I thought of was, wow, how cool is this, for kids?
Well, and then, and then there might be a question, well, how is that necessary for a retreat center? The families that came, they were grandparents and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And to see how they are moved in this place, obviously, they'll know the true meaning of Christmas. And we even have a statue with Santa with the Christ child.
Oh, wow.
So that need to incorporate it. And the children, and they begin to think of Rosaryville as a special place to come to for their spiritual needs.
That's it. We've talked about, the different usages of things that happen here, but we're going to backtrack now to this particular chapel that we're in because although there will be an app that you can come and actually get a description of these windows, I would like Laverne to tell us a little bit more about them because they're absolutely beautiful here.
They certainly are. The stained glass windows, there are 5 on either side. The one side is the Joyful Mysteries, the one that faces the east, and the other side is the Glorious Mysteries that faces the west. But each window is divided into three parts. The mystery is the large rectangle in the center, where overhead is a little arch that represents congregations that have a history with Rosaryville.
Oh, wow.
And the bottom rectangle, the little transom that opens, is all representative of a Dominican saint.
Oh, my goodness.
So what they've done is they've equated one just for the sisters that are from New Orleans, St. Mary's Dominican Sisters in New Orleans. They're on the Nativity, the window that represents the Nativity, right. And what this is that you'll see that there is a shield in there, and it has each of them have symbols. There's a clover that came from Capra, Ireland.
Oh, wow.
There's a lily, representative of Our Lady. There's a pelican. Their home state is the seal of Louisiana. And the escutcheon for St. Dominic is in the center, all surrounded by a rosary, of course. And the motto across the top is Veritas, truth.
Oh.
Dominicans, all preachers of truth. So that's just these windows. The wrought iron that's behind the altar is representative of the Eucharist. It's all wheat and grapes.
Oh.
There's marble. The tabernacle itself is cloisonné, and the cloisonné is the artwork like from Fra Angelico. And each thing in this chapel has a story. So that's why everyone comes
true.
Want the app.
And there's one story, too. There's a tiny little statue of St. Dominic. Tell us that story, because he is the founder for the Dominicans.
Yes, he is.
So.
And that tiny little statue has a lot of mileage on him. He was found in the rubble of a destroyed village in Europe by a local soldier who saw him in pieces, put him in his knapsack, and brought him back home. He arrived in New Orleans after the war, and the family, he was killed, I'm afraid to say, just maybe 2 or 3 years after he came home, and his family gave it to the Dominican Sisters. So we have him in a place of honor in our chapel.
We're talking about this beautiful chapel, and I have to ask about the Stations of the Cross, because from where I'm sitting,
they're beautiful.
I'm
yes,
looking
they
out
are.
and going, there's got to be a story there, too.
There certainly is. There's stories about each thing in this chapel. The Stations of the Cross were made by the same person who carved the crucifix on the main altar. A gentleman in Europe, in the Alps actually, and in lieu of painting them, which would have been too harsh, they're tinted so that there's a much softer, realistic look to the stations and the crucifix itself.
Were they just commissioned to him, or is there a connection?
I'm not for sure,
I was just curious.
But the deeper that I learn about the history of Rosaryville, the more I see there are connections that we were not aware of.
And one thing y'all were not aware of not long ago, y'all found some boxes that had been put up that had all kind of relics and memorabilia from when the sisters were here, right? And those are on display downstairs that are so worth seeing. Tell us a little
Definitely,
bit
Renee,
about
it's
some of
not
that.
only from the sisters that were here, but the sisters, the Dominican sisters in New Orleans, had Dominican college. So
they
that
did.
there were antiques and things that they used in Dominican college that they had to close, and it was bought by Loyola, who did the same thing with the Mother House and the Dominican High School. So there's lots of places that have a Dominican history that are no longer around, and what do you do with them? And when they were just in boxes and sent here, it's like, they need to be honored. They need to be seen. So we've little by little just put them in china cabinets, along the hall downstairs with labels. And hopefully the intent is to make a little booklet only of those types of things that you can keep with you. Just take and go with it.
Yes, because so much of it, too, like you pointed out one thing to me earlier about a spoon and fork, because the nuns were not allowed, they were not given anything when they came here. They had to bring their own utensils.
Correct.
And their own silverware. Back then, silver was what you had.
That's exactly
So-
right. That was almost a ritual where the family would send their daughter or their loved one off
With a fork and a spoon and a plate and what she needed here. And,
with their silverware. So we've kept those. We've kept those, and you see one of those in the china cabinet for Sister Mary Delaney, Mother Delaney.
Mother Delaney, I was about to say. And we're, as always, running out of time with so much to talk about. And there's one thing I really don't want to miss because my grandkids are probably going to come. Y'all actually have a camp here
Oh,
for
my
kids.
goodness, we have a camp here. We have a
And it's
great
amazing.
camp here.
That's
Camp
everything I was
Kateri.
reading.
Camp Kateri. It was initiated back with the sisters when the sisters were here running the camp, and there was a little brief pause maybe between the times, but it was reinstituted, and Camp Kateri has become phenomenally successful. These children are forming memories for life. They get to interact with others. They do the typical camp things, the building of a fire. This is a place where they actually have bonfires and marshmallow roasts, and they sing around the campfire. There's horseback riding. There's canoes. We have a pond here. There's games that are brought in, and our camp directors are very good at changing it from year to year so that the ones that have come
before can come back.
come back and they don't have the same stuff.
And it was interesting because when I was researching this too, it was, I think the stables were built like by two Southeastern College girls or something that came and helped to build that so that they could offer that. And it's open to boys and girls, young ages. And all the things you were mentioning, I was a campfire girl. So, I went to camp up around St. Francisville, but I have fabulous memories of that. And so I had no idea that even for children, something like that was provided here. And it's like a week-long typical camp experience. And these grounds are magnificent.
There's several weeks that are offered. And actually, I believe there's already a waiting list.
That's what I was seeing on the internet. So, that's just another aspect of everything that you can possibly experience here at Rosaryville. So
it is an amazing place.
It is. Any one last thing that sticks in your mind before we close, if you can think of anything? And if not, there's 1,001 things that she's told me about. But
I'm not
putting you on
for
the spot
sure.
here.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. I'm not sure what would take precedence other than the fact of gift yourself with the opportunity for quiet.
And that's perfect. We couldn't end on a better note. So, Ms. Parfait, thank you for being my guest today. I have learned so much about this place. So I thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for asking us.